This is our 2013 Monte Bello, 51st vintage that Ridge has produced this wine. So coming from a really dry growing season here, we're in the second year drought. The vines were beginning to feel a bit of that water stress or lack of water resource. Luckily, the limestone soils here do retain some moisture. The winter rains that we did receive fell pretty short, quick, and ended by January. So the rest of the growing season, as the vines woke up and began growing, were pretty much absent rainfall. And the vines set less crop. The yields here were 79.8 tons from 65.4 acres. So just, 1.1 or so tons an acre. That's extremely low yield. But the fruit was high quality. Tiny berries loaded with flavor. We harvested early, by I think the 8th of October, we're about finished with the harvest. So the fruit came in relatively early with just perfect weather during the summer and fall. Really allowed for even ripeness. Handpicked the fruit and brought it to the winery, de-stemmed whole berries and sorted. The fruit in the fermenters then underwent a natural fermentation with natural yeast coming in on the grapes. In this vintage, with the tiny berries, we were dealing with a lot more concentration of color and tannin. So it took no effort to get the color, as you can see. Nice, deep, saturated wine. Tannins, however, is something we had to really pay attention to. So we were really limiting the amount of pump overs that were given. But we didn't want to press off very sweet, so we really had to balance it and go for a process that we call a non-active pump over, where we're not actively irrigating the skins. Instead, we're circulating the juice below, aerating it to keep the yeast happy and healthy and fermenting. So we were doing that for many days, and just as we were getting ready to press off close to dryness, we were able to then give the cap one last final pump over, sitting there tasting as we irrigated the skins to really flesh out the wine, to then separate it, press off. And in 13, we really couldn't use much of the press wine. We had to hold most of that out because the free runs themselves were so well structured. As the natural malolactics then began on each of the separate parcels, we were able to barrel them down into new American oak barrels and allow them to finish. So by the end of January of 2014, a couple months after the harvest, we then sat down, went through a big selection process, tasting all the possible lots, and in the end selected quite a few of them as Monte Bello. Again, with this 2013 growing season, the concentration and the intensity that we were given in the fruit really resulted in such fine quality developing in the great majority of the parcels that the selection was relatively easy. We sat down, saw most everything of Monte Bello quality to then be able to assemble a slightly above average size production, even with those low yields. So what that meant then, the estate productions of the same vintage were much smaller in size because most of the fruit was geared towards making this Monte Bello. Now, the wine, once assembled, then sat in barrel another year and a half. We often give Monte Bello some fairly lengthy American oak barrel aging. So in this year's selection, we put together a blend which is actually quite unusual for Monte Bello. It's 80% Cabernet Sauvignon, which isn't too far off from normal. I mean, it kind of hovers between 64 and it could be as high as 88%. So 80% is a little bit on the higher side. But what's unusual is the fact that the second grape is not Merlot. It's Petit Verdot, and followed by the third variety, Cabernet Franc at 7%. And what's unusual is 5% Merlot. 2013 was really tough on Merlot. The vines did not enjoy the drought effect at all. And so we were not able to use much of the Merlot that came in from the vineyard. It's the second most widely planted variety in acreage on Monte Bello property, but in the end, only one single parcel, it's a 2-acre parcel, made it into this year's blend. So it's definitely dominant Cab, and You can feel the weight and the seriousness of the Petit Verdot as the second grape, followed by Cab Franc, which is that beautiful aromatic grape. So it's really come together nicely as a really dark and serious Monte Bello. It's really saturated on the palate. Just really loaded with that blackcurrant, licorice. So it's a very deep, very serious wine. It's got the aging potential of 40, 50 years. You know, it's a vintage I really hope to be around long enough to really see how it can be when it's 40, 50 years old. It's really just a seductive wine. It's just classic Montebello. I hope you enjoy it.